he's always welcome tourists. And I just did a video on Tijuana. We were talking about how the police and how the Mexican police and everybody screws. Cuba's the complete opposite. They totally cater to the tourists. They don't mess with them. The cops don't mess with you. You're safe as a kitten. You don't really have to worry. They don't. I mean, Castro has laid down strict martial law on its police and its citizens. The law being, do not fuck with the tourists. Don't mess with them, and they don't. So it's cool. It's my favorite place, and I'm surprised I've only been there twice. I've been to Thailand 3 times. I've only been there twice. Anyway,
Wow, that was intense. This is someone who's kind of creepy on the internet. I was kind of going through just looking for things about Cuba, and this was this man who goes all over the world like only for sex. He calls himself a sex tourist. And like you said, he's been to Bangkok, and I think he has said he's been to 20 countries or something. I watched a couple of these in shock, and he said that Cuba was the number one country. And you just heard him say why? Because it caters, there's martial law on the police, and the tourists run the show. I guess I just wonder what it is, and I haven't been there. But people can still go places and be deceived at the places that they are. So I don't know necessarily if I went, if I would or would not be, would or would not be deceived. I've known other people who have gone there, and maybe the most interesting assessment was from this person named Patrick, who was not part of any group. He was like this Englishman, although who knows, he was probably a spy, right? I mean, who just sort of goes to Cuba on a whim in a way. But maybe he did. And he had said that, very, very interestingly, that he'd gone on this tour where, Cuba was trying to sell itself, and he wasn't just sort of at the bars, but went to like a mental hospital there. And it was very interesting. He said that he really realized they perform lobotomies, things, I guess they do it here too, but just that there was a sense of primitiveness, and that it wasn't so great, and that everyone was kind of trying to sell it as such. And the people that I knew who had been going kind of sold me that it was really great. So I felt like, wow, they're probably ideologues, right? And they're probably overlooking certain things. And, so it was hard to gauge. I remember at one point, when the internet was sort of first coming out, not first, but I don't know, like early 2000s or something, kind of typing in like a law firm I had worked at where the Dulles brothers were, one of them had been a partner and everything, Sullivan and Cromwell. And for fun, I typed in Sullivan and Cromwell, and then I typed in Cuba. And weirdly, it showed like a meeting in Toronto, Canada. It was like, we're meeting in the Moose Room for this German company. And so I don't know. I mean, when you look at things, it's not like, the people got mad and revolted. You sort of, hear that when you study, Russian history. I remember being told that, and kind of being a little feeling cheated by my college professors later when I saw that, Lenin was funded by, what, Chase Manhattan Bank or whoever was there at the moment, and the Rockefellers had their hands in it, and that, I don't know, Castro's a Jesuit, right? It just all starts to become more and more difficult to find the real truth beneath things, right? And, who is funding who, and supposedly we're fighting communism, but we're also funding it. And if you see some really excellent speakers, there really are some. There's one man that's amazing, and he did die a few years ago, but who had seen that the people that were slaughtering our youth in Vietnam, our beautiful youth, those weapons were all funded by Wall Street. It was a genocide against our own people that we allowed to happen because nobody seemed to know. They just say communism and everyone goes crazy and everything, right? And they drafted people. They didn't even have a choice, but those weapons weren't being made in little huts in China or whatever, and everything in the Soviet Union was originally funded by the banksters. And you even look at really murderous types like Trotsky. That wasn't even his real name, and he was from New York. A lot of the people that took over Russia at that point were from New York. Lenin wasn't, but Trotsky sure was, and there's just a whole bevy of them who were. So it was like this kind of almost American Wall Street thing going on. And if Cuba really truly were a threat, I think that we would have just we would have knocked him off. It's just, I don't know. Would it have led to a war with Russia? Well, Russia sort of fell, and right now all they have are the Chinese, and that's kind of an uneasy, strange alliance. The people that I know who are pro-Cuba suddenly became pro-Chinese, and they were poo-pooing Tiananmen Square, and it's interesting to see how they operate, or when they were sort of aligned with the Soviets, that they were oh, there were no purges in Russia, that's just propaganda, it's just very, very interesting to see. So, this could be, I used to sort of almost get a psychic feeling that Cuba was meant for us not to see, that maybe there's experiments, maybe there's things that they don't want the American public to see, and it's sort of just just kind of off limits for us, like those secret labs in Haifa or Plum Island. And maybe it's not even a psychic feeling. I had mentioned that I'd seen a meeting with Sullivan and Cromwell and a German, it was called Technic or something, IKT at the end, and it was Biotech in Cuba. And I think someone told me there was actually a little James Bond movie about something like that, Biotech in Cuba, the whole Plum Island thing. So, interesting, and then there's the whole Castro's a Jesuit, right? And, if you want to fall down the Jesuit hole, that's always fun to do too. That will take you straight into the Illuminati and the Knights Templar, and really into, that they're sort of the satanic branch of the of the Catholic Church or something like that. So Cuba. What is Cuba? This Sexterus guy was saying, that it was really over the top. that it was like the number one sex tourist country. And I had thought, wow, here's this guy as a sex tourist or whatever, right? And, like it's crazy. And, he's been everywhere and he's just like, oh, Bangkok, that's nothing compared to Cuba, and I'm just like, whoa. Like, because, we don't really hear about Cuba so much. But if you're like in the know, it sounded really creepy. I think, it kind of even sort of weirded him out. And he did say that it's gotten sort of less like it was, because people were kind of freaking out. Like they would go there and it was sort of like every single person there was like there to be their prostitute or something. It's like, oh, the person cleaning your room, yeah, you could have them. Or, if you're walking down the street, you want to like, I don't know, like molest the guy on the porch over there, you can, and the police will make sure that you can. Like, it's just like, I think for some sex tourists even, it was too much, right? They're just like, oh my God. So it said that Castro did like get embarrassed, like, because he was just known as being like the most perverse country in the world. So I guess it's like a little bit more like under wraps at this point. But it's like, wow, because I just, there was this group called Pastors for Peace, and maybe they were on the up and up. I don't know. Like my ex had worked for them, and I'm not just like dissing them because like my ex worked for them, but people would come back like weirded out. And there was another guy that was a driver who was, he was a Vietnam vet actually, and he was like really alcoholic at some point in his life coming back from Vietnam. So he would volunteer to drive buses and drive things for different groups around just to, he wouldn't drink. If he was driving in a group, he absolutely would not drink. And he was coming back just going, what the hell, And then like there were like quote unquote right-wing organizations that, they'd always leave the bus behind. They would always donate the buses. And then there were people saying that the buses were like being turned into prisons and stuff. It was just like really getting out of hand. But there was this really, to me, a creepy minister that was always going down. And, he would go down like without his wife and stuff. He'd go down alone, and he was like really super into Cuba and everything. And all he did was like sit around. The groups used to start where we lived, just because of the fact that we were in the Northwest, and they'd have caravans that would start in New York, Minneapolis, and Vancouver, Canada, and then they would all meet up in Texas and then cross the border together. And I think one time they were turned away because there were like hundreds of these, and I don't even know where they came from. It was so obscure, like, wow. And you can see it sometimes, where there's just like hundreds and hundreds of these buses, And wow, I didn't know they had Western Union there. That's wild. I think that's from the old Hershey plant too, this train right here. Someone had told me that, and the town is called like Hersey because the H fell or something, and there's a place called like Hersey, Cuba. But anyway, help, I lost my train of thought. Oh my God. So they had like these 3 starting points, and so, there would be like really strange people that would come, and I'm so sorry I don't have like, more pictures of them and things like that. But they were like really, really intense. And, they were going down right under the auspices of being like part of this like religious kind of order. But it was never, but the people that were supposedly religious weren't really, and the ministers were odd. And this minister, I remember I said to him, I just found out there's like child labor in Cuba. I just found out. Here's the inside of a bus from one of the later caravans. And this was one, there weren't very many people around. It was kind of near the end. A lot of people were kind of like dying off at that point. But look at the weird donations. Like they're donating plastic potty chairs. Like why, right? I mean, and I remember my mother asked about that one. She was like, you said you take aid to Cuba and like you just have like these old like plastic chairs. And then Rick was like, well, it's symbolic. It's symbolic donations. But they would go down. But I told this minister, I was kind of reading about different things going on there. And I brought up to him, I said, I'm really freaked out that I found out they take your children away in Cuba when they're pretty young, right? Maybe like 12 or so, maybe younger, I don't know. And they put them to work in like bean fields or, they put them to work. So you're separated from them. They are gone. And then I mentioned it to my ex. My ex was like, yeah, that it is a bad thing. And that's where a lot of the girls get pregnant because they go off there and there's no one watching them. And usually they get pregnant by, the guys that run the fields and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, like this is like, we never hear about this, right? Like this is outrageous. And then I said that to that man, right? Like, I just think that is so wrong that they take these children away. And he's like, well, they're not children. I mean, they're like, they're like 9 and 10 and stuff. Like, they're not children. And that just freaked me out that this guy was saying that children weren't children and that it was fine for them to do hard labor when I never saw that guy get off his rear end. Now, this woman had never gone on a Cuba trip before. Her husband was a huge Cuba guy, and he had died not the day before, like a year before. And this person, trying to remember, he was a driver, and he was kind of like really funny and stuff. I'd actually gotten on because I had wanted to film this other guy that was like always in the shadows. So I always noticed that there were people in the shadows and then there were these sort of front people. See, there's the guy. There's the guy. Do you see? My camera's kind of veering around, but I was really trying to get that guy. And he stayed at my home where I lived. And he always had that cap way down. And, and there were always people like this around. And one of my favorites was one who, they would always kind of take over the house, these Cuba caravan people, right? And yeah, this guy looks really religious, right? And he had like a whole like computer set up on the table. I don't know if you saw it in the beginning of this. He had this table with like computer and cell phones and everything. He was always in the bushes. I never knew his name. But there was one time who, like, as the caravan was pulling out and it was totally full of people, just jam-packed, and they said they found out that I had a computer in an area they didn't know about. And they had gone around and done things to every computer in the house. And as they were leaving, she said, you didn't tell me you had a computer too. Like, she's yelling that off the bus, right? It's just like, wow. Like, these are like super spooks, this is pretty wild. So, who is this guy? I also had film of him in the bushes. Like, he was literally talking to people on the phone, like deep in the bushes. It was like I don't know, it was like something out of a comedy. It was hilarious. So anyway, let's talk things. I don't know if they're like, I just thought of something. Castro had some ex-bodyguard that said, he like fled to the US and said it's just like a big cocaine field there just to like supply Americans with cocaine. So who knows? Who knows what Cuba is? Indeed. Take good care, everybody. And what do you think that one's name is, huh?